My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hello and welcome to the Plant School Podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here listening today. We're going to be going over everything about the pothos plant. This is arguably one of the most common, most famous houseplants, whatever you want to call it, and I can't believe I haven't covered it yet. Turns out I covered it very early on in the life of this podcast. It was episode 39, and I don't know how many of you were here from the beginning, but my podcast has changed quite a bit. In the beginning, I had my husband on with me. He would ask me questions about houseplants. He knows nothing about them, right? So he would ask me questions about them and I would answer them, and that was the format of the podcast. Obviously, he's not here doing it with me anymore. Our lives were just really busy to be doing a podcast that took both of our time. Anyways, that was probably too much information, but because the podcast had changed so much, I ended up archiving those first 50 episodes, and I'm revisiting this one today, and I'm so excited to dive into it. Before we get into it, let's do our giveaway winners. This is something I do every single episode. I take two winners, one who has commented on Spotify on the most recent episode, and then I take another winner from Apple Podcasts, someone who has left a review. And what you win as a giveaway winner is a bottle of Prop Drops and a bottle of Leaf Shine from Market Botany. If you want to check them out at any point, because I talk about them quite a bit, you can go to their website, marketbotany.com, and use code PlantSchoolPodcast, and that gets you 10% off your order. But let's get into today's winners. Starting with Spotify, last episode was about Botanica, which is a tarot deck all about the language of flowers. We interviewed Kevin, and I had asked you guys if you guys were interested in the language of flowers or just simply to leave a comment. And today's winner is Caleb Dorweiler. They said, "Thanks for another great episode, Rachel. You're welcome. So glad to have you here listening, Caleb. And if that is you and you're listening, go ahead and email me at tenneyplants@gmail.com. That's TENNEY plants@gmail.com. Send me your address and we will get that giveaway package sent your way." And before I move on to the Apple Podcasts winner, for all of you listening on Spotify, and if you want to enter in to win the giveaway for next episode, go ahead and scroll down on this episode and comment if you own a pothos plant, and if so, what kind. I imagine a lot of you listening do own one, since it is one of the most common houseplant, and I'm interested to hear what kind you have. Or if you would rather not answer the prompt, that is totally fine with me, and you can simply comment whatever you would like. All right, moving over to our Apple Podcasts winner, someone who has left a review on the podcast. And today's winner, their username is Rivka Elizabeth. They said, "I love this podcast. I've been listening since I started taking care of plants. I love how easy they make it to learn how to take care of your plants. The episodes are perfect length with getting to the point. I also like the brief history thrown in each episode. I love my variegated pothos, philodendron, rubber tree, and begonia, all of which are doing well thanks to this podcast." It makes me so happy to hear that it is helpful for you. Rivka Elizabeth, go ahead and email me at tenneyplants@gmail.com and we'll get your giveaway package sent your way as well. And thank you to everyone who participates, to all of you who leave a review, who comment on Spotify. I love the feedback and getting to hear from you guys. All right, let's dive into today's episode. I always start with this question. asking what this plant is. So, what is a pothos? A pothos is one of the most underrated plants in my personal opinion. That is not a fact. But it's an evergreen vine with alternating heart-shaped leaves. It's possibly one of the easiest plants to care for. Sometimes it is mistaken for a heartleaf philodendron. They do look very similar. They're both vining plants. I feel like when I first started out in houseplants, I couldn't tell the difference between the two. But now that I've been working with them for so long, I have both a pothos and multiple heartleaf philodendrons, and I can't believe that the two are mistaken for each other, but that's only because I see them on the daily. If you're confused on which is which, there are many detailed online pictures that you can look at. But pothos plants tend to have a more shiny, waxy leaf, whereas a heartleaf philodendron kind of has more of a matte look to it. It's not as shiny, not as waxy. The pothos plant has a lot of nicknames that go with it, probably because there are so many varieties, but some common names are devil's ivy, which I've heard conflicting reasons for why this is. One was that it is really hard to kill, so that is why it's called devil's ivy. The other one I saw was it's called that because when you leave it in a dark area, it still remains green, and that's why it's called devil's ivy. I'm not sure, but I feel like the more common one I saw was because it's really hard to kill. But other common names include golden pothos, Ceylon creeper, hunter's robe, ivy arum, simply houseplant, which made me laugh. It's so common and well known that one of its nicknames is just houseplant. That's it. And some others, because I'm not done with these common names, are money plant, silver vine, Solomon Islands ivy, and taro vine. There are so many. I am sure I missed some, but those are a few of the ones that I saw again and again. So the pothos is actually a flowering plant. It's in the Aureaceae family. It will almost never flower in your home unless you give it artificial hormones. And interestingly, it is one of the only plants in the Aureaceae family that rarely develops a flower. And why does it act this way, you may ask? This is due to a genetic impairment of the gibberellin biosynthetic gene. That was a lot of big words. Basically, it can't produce gibberellins on its own, and gibberellins really help a houseplant flower. So if you want to make it flower, you get gibberellic acid and you spray it on the plant, and that can help it flower. I have not heard of anyone trying this. I should have looked it up, but the reason why I'm doubtful that anybody has really done this is because usually the pothos plant in our home is in its juvenile form. It hasn't reached its mature form. It requires so much more sun and a more tropical environment to do so, that it doesn't go into that mature form in our homes. And in that mature form is when it would be able to flower. So that's why I'm not sure if anyone has really tried the gibberellic acid and spraying it on to see if flowers would appear. In fact, the last spontaneous flowering when a pothos plant was in cultivation, not out in the wild, was reported back in 1964. It's been a whopping 61 years since we've had a pothos plant flower in cultivation. And if you're wondering what its flowers are like, they're very similar to like a peace lily or a monsteras. It has a spathe and it produces these hexagonal scales, which will pop off and they reveal this kind of orange kernel fruit, and it's usually eaten by like the local wildlife. So very similar to a monsteras fruit, if you've ever seen that before. And that's probably because they're in the same plant family. And though I have never seen a pothos plant's flower or their fruit, it's reported that the fruit smells very similar to like a ripe cantaloupe. So pretty pleasant smell. And my last little fact about pothos plants is that they can be variegated. It's very common for them to have that. It is caused by a mutation, and some popular cultivars of variegated pothos plants are pearls and jade, neon, silver satin, and marble queen. All right, moving on, let's talk about what they symbolize. If you listened to my last episode, you know that I love plant symbolism. I think it's just a fun topic. So the pothos plant, it symbolizes longing or perseverance, and it's also believed that the pothos plant holds the power of endurability, which makes sense. If this plant is really hard to kill, it sticks around, makes sense that its possible power is endurability. And according to Feng Shui, if you are into that, the pothos is believed to improve air circulation and draw in good qi or good energy. And let's move on and talk about where they originate. This is actually really interesting because it took a while for us to figure out where the heck this plant began, where it was actually native to. So it is known now that the pothos plant is native to the Aureum in the Society Island of French Polynesia. It is wild in many tropical countries. It can actually be very invasive. One example of it being invasive is in Sri Lanka, where it has basically overgrown everything, specifically on several hectares of the Udawada Kili Sanctuary. And when I looked up pictures, it was seriously just over everything, over trees, over bushes. It has overtaken. If any of you are familiar with kudzu and how it's kind of overtaken some of the southern states, would you call them southern? I've only seen it in Mississippi, so I'm not really sure. But kudzu is an invasive species, and it just grows over everything. And that's what it brought to my mind when I saw the pothos plant in Sri Lanka growing over everything. But it's common in quite a few areas. Another area is in Florida. It's actually listed on the Florida Exotic Pest Control Council's 1990 list of invasive species. And like I mentioned, because it is kind of everywhere, it's invasive, it grows in the wild in so many different places, it was just in 2004, 21 years ago, really not that long ago, that an aroid botanist, Peter Boyce, discovered where it actually originated, which was that island in French Polynesia. But in the wild, the pothos plant can look quite a bit different. I mentioned that in our homes, it kind of stays in its juvenile form. It doesn't reach its mature form. But in the wild, it's a hemiepiphyte, meaning that it starts its life on the ground in a juvenile form, but then it will eventually start to climb to reach the sunlight. And once it's there, their leaves get quite large, like 2 feet in length. And they have these really deep fenestrations in their leaves, or cuts in their leaves. So when you look at pictures, you'll probably see that they look very similar to a Monstera deliciosa because of those deep fenestrations. But it's a pothos plant. It just looks so different from its juvenile form. All right, let's talk about the pothos plant's history. I did a lot of digging for this section, probably because I was worried its care portion would be so minimal because it's such an easy plant. But don't worry, I include a lot of really great information in its actual care. But also it has a really fun history, kind of a crazy history to start with. So it all started when it was formally described in 1789 by a French botanist. His name was Antoine Laurent de Jussieu. I do not speak French, but he described it in his work Genera Plantarum, and he listed it as a climbing aroid of Southeast Asia and called it Potho, hence its common name that has stuck around. The funny thing is that the genus Potho, it was kind of like a dumping ground for all these nondescript aroid vines. When people didn't know where to put them, they would shove them in Potho. And it wasn't revisited until about 100 years later when Linden and Andre named it Pothos aureum. And it stayed that way. In 1899, just almost 20 years later, a French doctor and botanist, he named it to its current genus, which is Epipremnum. But he named it, instead of Epipremnum aureum, he named it Epipremnum moriense. But honestly, this didn't catch up to the rest of the world. His classification, I'm not sure if he didn't classify it formally or what it was, but it took 65 years for someone to look at it and officially move it into the Epipremnum genus. And don't worry, people kept scooching around to other genuses. For some reason, no one listened to that French doctor and botanist. So in 1908, Adolf Engler, he placed it into the Scindapsus genus. And that is where it stayed for quite a while. And since the pothos plant, it doesn't really flower that often, it finally flowered in Puerto Rico and Miami botanical gardens around the same time, and they were able to really observe it. This was in 1962. A man by the name of Monroe Birdsey, he got out his microscope and started looking at the flowers, and he realized, oh, this doesn't belong in the Scindapsus genus. This belongs in the Epipremnum genus. Oh my goodness, we could have known this back in 1899, but no one was listening back then. And finally, it was codified, like officially submitted for its name by George Bunting, and it has stayed as Epipremnum aureum. It is written down in the Annals of the Missouri Botanical Garden, and that is its official name, Epipremnum aureum. Not Potho, not Scindapsus, not Rhaphodora, because I've heard that one got thrown around for a while too, but it is Epipremnum. So the pothos plant, I say that now, and now I feel like I'm wrong in saying that, but we're going to keep using that term. The pothos plant was brought over by European explorers to the West in the 19th century, and it quickly gained popularity. It has been cultivated by growers for over 100 years now. It's considered to be one of the most important commercially produced foliage plants. Foliage plants are basically your house plants, and the pothos is one of the most important of those. It's also considered to be one of the most widely cultivated plants in modern history and may be one of the most common houseplants out there. And why is it so popular? Well, it's probably linked to its hardiness. It can handle non-humid environments, dry soil, dark conditions. It can be grown in water. It's an amazing plant all around, and a lot of people may tell you that the pothos plant cleans the air. This was made popular by a study from NASA, but there are a few flaws with that being a true statement for us in our homes. Yes, houseplants do have the capability of cleaning the air, but when NASA did this experiment, they did it in a sealed chamber of air, and we, in our homes, do not live in sealed chambers. We open doors. We have air conditioning, heating. We have windows. Air is constantly being exchanged. And so the purifying element of your houseplants is so minimal when the air is being changed out so consistently as it is in our homes. I will die on this soapbox. I've said it so many times, but it is still such a common misconception because it sounds really nice. Marketers want to tell you that so that you will buy more houseplants. And I get it. I understand it. It's just false, though. They just like to leave out the convenient information that NASA study can't be applied to our homes. All right, I just had to throw that in there because that is part of its modern history as well. But as you can see, they're still one of the most common houseplants. I love them. I own one. I don't even know what kind it is. It was one of the first houseplants I ever got, but I love the guy because he just sticks around and can take anything that I throw at him. I have another one that is a rare variety of a pothos. It's actually the only rare-ish houseplant I own, and that guy is not so easy, but I still love him. He has fenestrations, which is really fun, and it's also a variegated variety. So it's a cool, fun-looking houseplant, but he's not living up to the common houseplant and how durable it is. So let's talk about how to care for one, how to keep them happy. The good news is it's not too hard, but let's talk about it. How do you water a pothos plant? You want to water when the top few inches of soil are dry. Underwatering will cause your pothos to have droopy leaves. The leaf tips can kind of start to turn brown, whereas overwatering usually has symptoms of yellowing leaves and black stems. In general, you want to err on the side of watering less, especially in those cooler months of the year. But also, the pothos plant just handles dry conditions more than it can handle overly wet conditions. So if you're a forgetful houseplant parent, the pothos, it's got your back. It can be a great option. And though the pothos plant does like humidity, it handles low humidity very well. And also, I mentioned this too, it can be used in hydroponics. You can be growing it in aquariums. I've seen people do that. or you can grow it in a vase full of water. You can use leca. It does well in so many different mediums. Moving on to its lighting needs, bright indirect sun is the ideal, as for most houseplants, but it tolerates low light very well. I'm speaking from experience. Too much sun can cause leaf scorch or cause the leaves to turn pale, and too little sun can cause your pothos to be kind of leggy. There's a lot of space between the leaves. It's also known as etiolation, and it can also cause slower growth. And something to note is that if your pothos is one that has a lot of variegation, you really want to give them that bright indirect sun, or you can lose its variegation. But they prefer temperatures between 45 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 7 degrees to 24 degrees Celsius. Moving on to how to fertilize a pothos plant. You want to fertilize when it's showing a lot of active growth. This is usually in the spring or summer when you have those extended hours of daylight. And when you notice this, you can use a general fertilizer such as a 20-20-20, about 2 to 3 times per year. And if you're unfamiliar with fertilizers, that 20-20-20, it's simply the percentage of the active nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that fertilizer. So for the 20-20-20, it's 20% nitrogen, 20% phosphorus, and 20% potassium. Some plants need more phosphorus because they can flower, but for the pothos plant, just an even keel general fertilizer works great. And some find that you don't really need to be super strict about fertilizing your pothos plant because it is so low maintenance. All right, moving on to how to repot one and what kind of soil does it like. Using a standard houseplant mix works really well, or getting a well-draining aeroid mix. They are not too fussy when it comes to what kind of soil they are grown in. And you want to repot them when the roots are coming out the bottom of the pot, or it's drying out super quick because there's not too much soil left in the pot. It's mostly just roots. And this happens maybe like every 1 to 2 years or so, and you want to switch it to a pot that's about 1 to 2 inches bigger. Don't go crazy big because houseplants do not love to sit in a whole lot of just wet soil that has no roots in it to absorb it. All right, let's talk about how to prune a pothos. If you feel like it's getting way too sprawled out, pothos are great. You can trim them back. That will help it be more full and bushy. And if you're wanting to completely start over, you can cut back to the soil level, leave 3 to 4 leaves, and this will encourage new branches and much more bushier growth. If it's a problem of it not getting enough sun, obviously move it to a sunnier location. In the wild, pothos plants, they get up to like 60 feet. That's 18 meters. Indoors, though, it's more around 20 feet. That's 6 meters. Although, when I was going through all my research, someone left a comment on one of the blogs. Their name was Pat Sacrismo. And she said that her pothos is 17 years old. And one of her vines, she took the time to measure it, and it was 91 feet long. That's crazy. That is such a long vine. Kudos to Pat Sacrismo for taking the time, first of all, to measure it, and then sharing it, but also for just taking such good care of her pothos plant. That's amazing. So you can choose whether you want your pothos to be more viney and sprawling, let it grow naturally, or you can use a trellis or a pole to kind of shape it the way you would like. All right, let's move on to how to propagate them. I love talking about this because it is so easy to propagate a pothos plant. It's super simple to make a cutting. In fact, this is just like a fun fact about my life that you may or may not care about. But I have a YouTube channel. It's called Tenny Plants. I don't know if you guys realize my last name is Tenny. That's why it's like in my email in my YouTube channel. But anyways, my YouTube channel, it's doing good. I'm very happy with it. But the reason why it has like survived and done so well is because of one video. It has just taken over my YouTube channel, done so well Whenever I get emails from YouTube and they're like, guess what your top video was this month? It's like, I know what it is. It's the same video that it has always been. And that video is how to propagate a pothos plant. When I was looking it up way back in the beginning of my houseplant days, I noticed there was no simple video. There was like a 15-minute long one, and it was infuriating to watch because I just wanted to know how to propagate a pothos. I didn't want to hear their life story. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a video, and I'm going to show how I do it. I did so. It's like 2.5 minutes long. And like I said, it has kept my YouTube channel afloat and relevant. It just makes me laugh. But yeah, you can go watch it for yourself if you would like. Please don't judge it too harshly because I made it in the beginning of my YouTube days, and I think the music is a little too loud on it now, looking back on it with the experience I have. But anyways, that was quite a tangent. It is a very simple process. So you're going to take a cutting from your pothos plant, usually from the end of a long trailing vine. You want to include 1 leaf and 1 node. If you're not sure what a node is, it's simply like a bump along the stem. It's like a little nub. And this is called a leaf bud cutting. You're going to take that cutting. You can use rooting hormone, such as prop drops, which you guys all know is what you get when you win a giveaway. That and the leaf shine. But you can use something like prop drops. You can use a powder rooting hormone, or you can just simply stick it in water with nothing on it, because honestly, it doesn't really need it. I will actually use my pothos cuttings to help other cuttings grow. If I'm propagating a snake plant, which are notoriously slow at growing roots in a water propagation, I will stick pothos cuttings in it as well, because they will actually release hormones that helps everyone in that little jar of water create roots more quickly. They are very good at rooting in water. So once you've placed that cutting in water, it's going to take about 2 to 6 weeks to start seeing some significant root growth. And just so you know, you don't have to put it in water if you don't want to. You can take that cutting and put it straight into soil if that's what you prefer, or some other soilless medium. And cuttings are known to be susceptible to leaf spots, root rots, or blights. That is the one hard part, if there could be a hard part about this, is the fungal infections. So to keep that from happening, you want to use clean scissors or clean shears when you're making a cutting. Make sure that the jar is completely clean that you are placing it into, and use clean water and change the water frequently. Anytime it's getting cloudy or discolored, change out the water, or just make a habit of changing it out frequently on your own. A lot of commercial producers for pothos plants, they will use leaf bud cuttings that we talked about, but they will also use single node cuttings. So it's just simply the node from the stem, no leaf attached with it. And they will use artificial lighting to really help that success rate. And they actually also use a basal heat plate, which keeps the temperature around 83 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius. That's just a bit of knowledge for you. You don't have to do that if you want to get super into it. It will definitely help your pothos cuttings, but it's not necessary. And any time that you are taking from a mother plant, make sure that you leave enough for that plant to keep going and growing. The industry standard, when they are taking cuttings to create large pieces of stock, they keep their mother plants between 4 to 5 nodes so that it can support itself and keep growing. And lastly, another propagation method that's not often talked about is you can divide your plant. You can gently cut up the root ball, divide your pothos plant into sections, and it will continue to grow from there. All right, let's move on. I only have 3 questions left. The first one is, are they prone to pests? Like any houseplant, they are. Mostly, though, to scale, mealybug, and mites. So to avoid this, check your houseplant often, first of all, and just make sure that there's no infestation occurring. And also, if you have found an infestation, you can use neem oil, you can use an insecticidal soap. You can wipe them off with a Q-tip that's been dipped in rubbing alcohol. They're not known for being a hard plant to treat, so you can get over these infestations if they do happen to occur. Another possible pest that you can deal with is a fungal pest. It's fungal leaf spot and botrytis. So this happens usually when you're growing your pothos plant in water. So to combat this, simply change out that water frequently, keep it fresh and clean. If it's growing in a medium like leca, make sure that you change out that leca or clean it every now and then. And just so you know, these pests aren't super common with pothos plants. They are generally pest-free and disease-free, but if you do happen to deal with any of that, now you know how to take care of it. All right, second to last question is just some extra care tips I want to throw at you. So, pothos plants, they contain calcium oxalates, which can really irritate your mouth. It can cause vomiting if you ingest it. So this is a plant you kind of just want to keep away from curious dogs and cats. It won't kill them, but it will irritate them and make them feel sickly. And the sap of a pothos plant can also be irritating and cause dermatitis or skin irritation. And last little extra care tip is to clean your pothos plant every few weeks with just a cloth, microfiber cloth, to remove dust and debris to help it have those clean leaves and aid in photosynthesis. Do I do this every few weeks? Absolutely not. But I do try to do it perhaps every few months. Okay, and my last question, I always just love throwing this in because it's just kind of a fun one. How long does a pothos plant live for? So before I tell you, they can grow in very ideal conditions, 12 to 18 inches of length every month. Every month. That's crazy. That's probably how Pat Sacrismo, I think that was her name, got her pothos to be 91 feet long. But just so you know, they can be very fast growing if they have ideal conditions. And they can live for quite a long time. The average lifespan is about 5 to 10 years, but they can live much, much longer. Some people say they can live indefinitely, and this is because you can propagate them so easily. You can trim off an end, let it grow roots in water, stick it back into the original pot of your pothos plant, and keep it growing indefinitely, really, which I think is amazing. This is why I love the pothos plant. It is nearly indestructible and so easy to care for. I know that you listening will be able to take such good care of your pothos plant after learning all about them, and I'm sure you're already doing that already. But thank you so much for listening and joining me for today's episode. I hope that you will be back in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of the Plant School Podcast. I'm actually really excited about this next one coming. I got to interview a friend, so I hope that you will be there and join me for it. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School Podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode. And you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School Podcast.